If you were a Nintendo fan in the mid-90s, there were two games that you just had to have. Donkey Kong Country and KI attempted to usurp Mortal Kombat as the most violent fighting game, and though it definitely had the better graphics, soundtrack, and gameplay, the violence wasn't really there, unless you were playing as Riptor. Now, the game had a sequel in the arcades called Killer Instinct 2, which was later ported to the N64 as Killer Instinct Gold. Was it called Gold? Well, they added not one, but two training modes and real 3D backgrounds. One of the things that kinda sucks is that the characters are still 2D sprites. Also, I hate how they removed two of my favorite characters, Riptor and Cinder. Man, I used to own it, Cinder. But I have to say, the new characters, including the two new chicks, Kim Woo and the barely cloth Amazon Queen Maya, not to mention Tusk, and the new and far more badass version of Spinal, did ease the pain to a degree. The gameplay hasn't really changed. It's still easy, simple, and fun, and they even fixed a thing I kinda hated about the first at KI. Overall, KI Gold is a kick-ass sequel with only one big problem. There's a huge glitch in the game. Whenever you happen to pass the character you're fighting next on the character selection screen, it not only mixes up the opponent's color scheme, but every character's color scheme, including the ending boss, Gargus. Oh man. Nintendo and innovation go together like apples into applesauce. Nintendo has innovated so many things into the world of video games that we don't even think about them anymore. The place where you best see these innovations are in the Nintendo controllers. Who came up with the D-pad? Nintendo, that's who. Before the NES, it was standard that most console controllers either had a joystick or a numeric keypad of some kind. With the SNES, Nintendo added more face buttons, two more, probably to compete with the Sega Mega Drive and its 3 buttons. They also decided not to go alphabetically, and they instead named the new keys X and Y, and you could still find these on the GameCube controller. Nintendo also made the gaming public aware of the shoulder buttons L and R, but beyond fighting games, I don't actually remember too many games that used them frequently. I guess Nintendo was just being prepared, but most of the time I kind of forget that they're there. Now this one people always look at funny, but the N64 gamepad, like a little brother, becomes your best friend once you get to know it. For me, the N64 controller just spells innovation. You have 3 ways of actually holding the controller, and not only that, it was the first console to come standard with an analog control stick. Even if it was so frail, it started to wear out after a couple of years. The great thing about this setup is that unlike the DualShock configuration, which Nintendo actually used on their GameCube controller, you don't have to negotiate the position of your left thumb and index finger. If you hold the right side outlet, you use the D-pad and the L button, and if you hold the middle outlet, you use the analog stick and the Z button. Yeah, that's another thing I loved, the Z button. At the opposite end of the alphabet from A and B, this thing became synonymous with crouching in 3D platformers like Super Mario 64. It was so illogical. Down, as in under the controller. I even remember how early publications made a big deal of how the middle stalk of the controller was shaped like the handle of a gun, and the Z button was the trigger. Though I only own one FPS game for the N64, I can see why the idea worked. The same kind of thinking was later implemented to the B button on the Wiimote. Unfortunately, things went downhill for the Z button after the N64. It became just another shoulder button for the GameCube controller, and later the second button for the Wii Nunchuck. Now this was really the thing that inspired me. The C buttons, made specifically for camera control in N64 games. In hindsight, these buttons got used for a lot more than simple camera control, and it appears Mario 64 was the only game that even tried to properly use the C buttons. I mean, that's what the C stands for. Camera control. Now, the Wiimote has been praised and criticized, and only time will tell what people thought of it in the long run. It definitely already has about as many uses as the GameCube controller had face buttons. The last feature of the N64 controller that really stood out was the module port, which wasn't used as extensively as I would have hoped, but still had a few nifty features. Now, I already mentioned the redundant as hell controller pack / memory card, but the module that most people remember from the N64 is the rumble pack, which nowadays is a standard feature of any modern gamepad or controller. There was also the Nintendo Transfer Pack, which unfortunately was never used outside the world of Pokemon games, but it was a fun idea.
It's me, Mario!
Super Mario 64. Still easily the best 3D platformer of all time. It's just that good. But there's another thing which this game is pretty good at that a lot of people don't even notice. Now, Mario 64 attempted to add a level of realism to Mario games. And this is the result. The sight of a drowning Mario desperately gasping for air and then just becoming a limp corpse. Oh my god. Forget about the negative effects of violent games. They actually put this shit in a game intended for all ages. This is the sort of stuff that traumatizes kids. And then Bowser's evil laughing head would give you nightmares. Now, Super Mario 64 is known for a lot of crazy and creepy shit. Remember that painting that slowly warped into the image of Bowser? Or the staircase which never ends? Even the Haunted Mansion level still creeps me out. I mean, what is that wailing sound? My god, is it the wind? Now here's a double whammy. If you have a fear of heights, Mario 64 offers a mountain floating in the sky. And if you fall off, you just keep falling and falling and falling. Man. And here's another one. If it wasn't bad enough that you were claustrophobic, but also happened to hate drowning, this little bonus stage in the game freaked me out when I was younger. Sure, I can breeze my way through it now, but seriously, is there anything scarier than being trapped in an enclosed space filled entirely with water? So now, for all the great attributes that Super Mario 64 has earned, we can add one more. Seriously creepy. Okay, you've seen my worst games for each console, but which one is actually the worst out of all of them? The number one choice was so obvious that I actually had to come up with reasons why the other four didn't suck as bad.
Number 5, Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike.
I'll give it this. I actually enjoyed playing this for the first time I got it. It wasn't until a bit later that I realized how bad the graphics, gameplay, and voice acting were. At least the intro was pretty cool. But this is a good example of a game where they did one thing right and fucked up everything else.
Number 4, Holy Magic Century / Quest 64.
Combining all the things I hate about RPGs and none of the good things, Holy Magic Century / Quest 64 / L-Tail Monsters can be summed up in one word: boring. The fact that you need the N64 controller pack just to save your progress is ludicrous. Well, I'll admit that Imagineer made a fair effort in trying to emulate a Japanese RPG. Most of the characters are exactly the kind of stuff you'd see in one. But honestly, who'd make an RPG with no cutscenes? So, why is it only number 4? At least they weren't trying to make a bad game.
Number 3, Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles.
I don't care if you do like light gun games. Resident Evil Umbrella Chronicles sucks balls. It's a complete waste of time for anyone who actually played through the Resident Evil games 0 through 3 to even have this game. Plus, playing it makes my arm hurt. But as bad as it was, at least it didn't look like shit. Unlike the next game on our list.
Watch your step, princess.
Don't call me princess.
Number 2, Batman Forever.
Trying to hog up some of the Mortal Kombat-like realism with digitized graphics and lacking gameplay are pretty much the only reasons why this game even exists. Fans are still divided over the movie. I love the movie, but I hate the game. Not only do the digitized graphics look like shit, playing this game is just boring. I will give Acclaim points for originality since the first level is actually loosely based on a deleted scene from the film where Two-Face escapes from Arkham at the beginning of the film. But even with all its faults, it's amazing this game could lose out to any game in the suckiness department.
Number 1, Dragon's Lair.
Now, I was actually a little hesitant about putting this game on the top of my list, because when I was a kid, I actually thought this game was kinda cool, and thought that the reason the game felt so hard was simply because I wasn't very good at it. But no matter how you put it, there's no defending a game where the gameplay is just fundamentally flawed. Sluggish controls and enemies that usually kill you with one hit make it into a game where most people don't even get past the first screen. After years of playing this shit, I still can't get past level 3. The only area where this game is true to the arcade classic is in the trial and error style of the gameplay, but that's it. What made me realize that this game is the worst of them all? I actually wrote a song about it. In 1985 they made a game called Dragon's Lair. It wasn't made to disc and then they went off and made a sucky NES version. Although I like the song a lot, the game is tough as shit. I never beat it and now there is nothing that can numb the pain. Now, in case you didn't know, F-Zero X is the sequel to the futuristic racing game F-Zero on the SNES. The thing that this game and Star Fox 64 have in common is that I'm probably more familiar with the N64 sequels than the Super Nintendo originals. In F-Zero, you compete against hordes of, more precisely 29, other racers to win one of the 3 cups in the game, which all comprise of 6 races raced on 6 tracks. You can only select from about a handful of characters at first, but the more races and cups you win, the more characters you get to choose from. The comic book style artwork of the menus and the heavy metal soundtrack are what define the feel of this game, as well as the many weird and goofy characters you get to choose from. Unfortunately, the graphic look becomes much more dull once you actually start the game. F-Zero X was the first N64 game to run at 60 frames per second, but to achieve this, Nintendo had to drop the amount of graphic detail on the tracks. Consequently, it seems like you're just racing in an ether of different colored gases, and whenever you do catch sight of a background detail, it's usually a heavily pixelated sprite. The gameplay is essentially simple to learn, but tough to master, and playing the game is fun and addicting. Before each race, you can set whether you want your vehicle to accelerate quicker or run faster, and it's important you make the right decision since you'll be bouncing off the sides of a swirly track if you're just racing at a speed that's just way too high. My only other complaints, aside the lack of detail on the tracks, are the unintelligible alien murmurings you hear on some of the musical tracks, and the robotic announcer who counts down to the beginning of the race, as well as the disembodied robotic voice who always tells you to watch your back or congratulates you for coming in at first place. Essentially, F-Zero X is an intense racing game that may look bland, but is a ton of fun to play.